Ladies and gentlemen, in a world that encourages us to share everything, constantly, our lives, our goals, our every waking thought, there is an ancient and powerful truth we often forget. Silence holds energy, and what you withhold from the world has just as much power as what you express. There are certain things that, when kept sacred, begin to grow roots in the invisible. And only when the invisible is strong enough does it emerge into form. Today I want to share with you 8 things there exist within each of us, a blueprint, an unseen architecture of the person we are becoming. This version of you doesn't live in the past. It doesn't rely on memories or traumas or stories that have been told 1,000 times in your mind. It lives in potential, in the unknown, in the field of infinite probability that exists just beyond the 5 senses. When you begin to visualize a life that surpasses your current circumstances, when you imagine yourself whole, abundant, deeply fulfilled, connected, and aligned, you are not daydreaming. You are constructing. You are designing a neurological, emotional, and energetic framework for a new reality to form. Every time you revisit that image in your mind, whether it's a vision of radiant health, loving relationships, meaningful work, or inner peace, you are activating the circuits of the brain and body to align with a new identity. You're rehearsing the future as if it were already real. Your body begins to believe it's already happening. Neurochemically, emotionally, energetically, it doesn't know the difference. But here's the key. In the early stages, this vision is fragile. It's not yet rooted in the soil of your biology. It hasn't yet taken hold in your subconscious patterns, your habits, your autonomic programming. It's a seed in the quantum, the invisible realm. And like any seed, if it's disturbed too early, if it's exposed to harsh opinions, doubt, or casual dissection, its growth can be interrupted. That's why you must guard it. When we speak too soon about our dreams, especially to those who don't have the capacity to see beyond their own limitations, we risk collapsing the wave function too early. We pull the vision out of possibility and into the gravitational pull of our current identity. The self that still remembers failure. The self that still needs proof. The self that has been hurt, doubted, dismissed, or conditioned to expect less. The blueprint of your future self requires coherence. It demands that your thoughts, your emotions, your actions, and your energetic field are in alignment. That means you must embody the person who has already arrived. Feel what they feel. Think as they think. Wake up with their certainty. Move with their clarity. But that alignment takes time. It takes inner stillness. It takes discipline. Not discipline as punishment, but discipline as devotion to the new. And so, in the sacred beginning of becoming, before you've fully stabilized in the new frequency, your vision must be kept close to your chest. Not because it's a secret, but because it's sacred. Not because others are untrustworthy, but because this version of you is still integrating. Still rewiring your neurology. Still repatterning your chemistry. Still carving new neural grooves and dissolving the old circuitry of survival and fear and scarcity. The blueprint of your future self is not a fantasy. It's a directive, a cosmic order, but only you can give it permission to come into form. Only you can rehearse the new feeling often enough that it becomes familiar. So familiar, in fact, that the old you feels foreign, uncomfortable, and eventually uninhabitable. There will be days when you'll feel the pull to announce it, to prove it, to gain support or validation. But every time you resist that urge and turn inward instead, you feed the design. You amplify the field. You deepen your trust in the unseen. Because that version of you, the one that's thriving, grounded, magnetic, and expansive, is already encoded in your consciousness. It's not something to chase. It's something to remember. It's not somewhere to get to. It's a frequency to return to again and again. Would you like this expanded into a guided meditation, audio script, or maybe even a journaling practice to pair with it? Healing does not begin at the surface. It doesn't start with the external change, the dramatic gesture, the visible breakthrough. Healing begins in the unseen, in the subtle shifts of energy, thought, and biology that most will never notice. It is not loud. It is not linear. It does not seek applause or recognition. It begins in the quiet moments when you decide, perhaps for the first time, that you're ready to feel differently. Your inner healing is not something you owe the world an explanation for. It is not a project with visible milestones. It does not follow the logic of time. Healing is remembering a returning to a state of balance and coherence that your body and spirit once knew intimately before the patterns of stress, survival, and separation rewrote the code. In the deepest sense, healing is reinstruction. It is teaching your nervous system a new rhythm, one that no longer orients around hypervigilance, self-protection, or emotional compression. It is the quiet decision to stop rehearsing the story of pain, to stop looping the same thought until it becomes identity. Instead, it's the conscious practice of creating new signals, new chemistry, that tells your body, it is safe now, you can soften here. But that transformation doesn't happen through external validation. It happens in the unseen interior spaces where your cells are listening, where your autonomic responses are recalibrating. It happens when you sit with yourself, not needing to explain, justify, or share. When you choose silence over storytelling, stillness over stimulation, integration over interruption. The early stages of healing are invisible because they occur below the threshold of language. Long before anything can be spoken, it must first be metabolized. The old grief, the suppressed rage, the silent shame, the wired-in fear, these aren't intellectual concepts. They are energies stored in tissue. They live in your fascia, your muscles, your organs. They shape your breath, your posture, your tone of voice. To truly heal is to allow those energies to be seen, not by others, but by yourself. Not to analyze them, but to feel them, without performance, without pressure, without pretending. And in that process, there is often a sacred silence, a period where nothing makes sense on the outside, where you are withdrawing from noise, disconnection, false momentum. Not because you're isolating, but because you're preserving, you're reconfiguring. You're listening to signals that no one else can hear, your own. The body doesn't heal when it's rushed. It doesn't respond to the demand for progress. It responds to the frequency of presence. The moment you stop trying to prove that you're better is often the moment you start actually becoming better. Because you're no longer reacting from your wounds. You're responding from your wholeness, even if that wholeness still feels unfamiliar. Healing also means grieving the old self. The one that survived, the one that adapted, the one that compensated, performed, and overextended just to stay connected. That self was brilliant, creative, and strong, but it was built on survival, and as you begin to heal, that old identity may start to fall apart. Not because you failed, but because you're outgrowing the need to be defined by your pain. You may feel disoriented, numb, tired, not because something is wrong, but because something is unraveling. Because in the spaces where pain once lived, there is now space for something else to enter. Something quieter, more regulated, more attuned. That space must be held, not filled. You might not be able to explain what's happening to others. You might not want to, and that's okay. Because healing isn't a performance, it's a frequency shift. It's the slow cellular remembering of what it feels like to live inside a body that isn't fighting itself. A body that feels like home again. Want me to continue this into a second section, like the somatic expressions of inner healing, or how to protect this process energetically? There's a kind of kindness that lives beyond transaction. A giving that emerges not from obligation, not from a need to be seen, not from some performance of goodness, from presence, from coherence, from an alignment with something higher than personal narrative. These acts move silently through the world. They are not broadcasted, posted, or tallied. They are energetic expressions of truth that ask for nothing in return. When you give from that space, from a state of wholeness, not lack, you are not seeking identity through generosity. You are not trying to fix, save, or control. You are simply allowing yourself to be a conduit of abundance, because you've remembered that the source from which you give is never depleted by the giving. True kindness, pure kindness, comes when you've stepped out of survival. When you're no longer calculating what you'll get back, no longer managing impressions, no longer needing others to witness your goodness to believe in it. It comes when your nervous system is regulated enough to extend energy without it being a cry for reciprocity. When your ego is quiet enough to let someone else's need matter more than your desire to be noticed. But in a world so addicted to recognition, it becomes tempting to turn even our kindness into currency. We tell stories of what we've done. We hold the door and expect a thank you. We share the donation, the compliment, the service, not because we're moved, but because we want to be validated. We measure impact by applause. We confuse visibility with value. And yet the universe works differently. Energetically, what you give without attachment multiplies. What you give without naming, without proof, without an audience, it carries a frequency so clean, so high that it ripples far beyond what can be seen. It moves through the field and bends reality in ways no one may ever trace back to you, because it was never about you. And that's precisely why it was so powerful. The purest acts of kindness aren't always grand. Sometimes they are as simple as presence, fully listening without needing to respond, making space for someone else's truth without overlaying your own. Offering time, energy, softness, even when no one will know, especially when no one will know. These acts require inner abundance, not money or resources, but energetic capacity. The ability to extend without collapse, to give without resentment, to serve without ego. They arise when you are so connected to your own source that giving becomes a natural overflow, not a performance. There is also something sacred about protecting those moments from the world's gaze. Not out of secrecy, but because their frequency shifts when they are exposed too soon to egoic interpretation. In the moment you turn an offering into a story about yourself, you subtly change the energy. You recenter the self. You dilute the vibration. There is something holy in what no one sees. Something profound in the gestures that move mountains within someone else and leave no mark of your name behind. You may never know the ripple. You may never see how your small kindness interrupted someone's shame spiral, softened their heart, gave them the strength to stay one more day. But that doesn't matter. That's not the point. What matters is the state you were in when you gave, what frequency you were broadcasting. Whether it came from lack or from fullness, whether it was performative or present, whether it asked for anything in return, even subtly. And so, the real work is not just in the doing, it's in the being. Becoming the kind of person who gives not because they should, but because it is simply who they are. Because the more they come into alignment, the more generosity becomes inevitable. Not effortful, not moral, just natural. Like breath, like light, like love moving without name, without need, without noise. Would you like me to expand the next section too? There are moments that arrive without warning, without logic, without explanation. Moments that pierce the veil of the ordinary and deliver something that doesn't come from thought, but from knowing. These moments are subtle, yet seismic. They don't make noise, but they shift something at the deepest level of your being. You don't ask for them with words. They come when the mind is quiet enough to receive, and the heart is open enough to feel what the intellect cannot grasp. Spiritual downloads don't announce themselves with language. They arrive as sensation, as presence, as an inner resonance that something essential has just landed. A truth not taught, but remembered. They bypass linear time, often containing lifetimes of insight compressed into a single inhale. You may not be able to articulate them. You may not even know what you've received yet. Something inside you has been reconfigured. A new circuit has been lit. These downloads don't occur in the noise of the world. They don't push through when your attention is fractured, when your nervous system is wired into urgency. They come in stillness, in surrender, in the space between thought and reaction. They flow through the subtle body carried by feeling and intuition, rather than reason or analysis. And because of that, they often can't be explained, not right away. The moment you try to pin them down with language, they begin to dissolve into something smaller than what they were. Because words are limited. They are symbols. And these transmissions are not meant to be symbols. They are meant to be integrations, felt in the body, processed through the breath. Not lectured, they are not for performance. They are not meant to prove your depth or spiritual insight to others. They are invitations, directions, codes meant for your evolution, not your platform. To share them too quickly is to risk translating something infinite into something digestible, and in doing so, altering its frequency. It is tempting, of course, to share the revelation, to name it, express it, deliver it to others in hopes that it will be understood. But the download doesn't ask to be understood. It asks to be honored. It asks to be integrated into your field, to be woven into the way you walk, the way you choose, the way you see. Only once it has rooted itself inside your being, once it has altered your vibration, can it begin to move outward with integrity. Some downloads are just for you. Not because you are meant to hoard wisdom, but because you are meant to embody it first. You are meant to metabolize it, not just with your intellect, but with your entire system. You are meant to allow the information to shape your frequency so that if and when it is ever expressed, it is not just an idea, it is a transmission. And in that state, the sharing becomes more than language. It becomes vibration. The words don't just inform, they transform. There is a sacredness to what comes through in those liminal spaces, in meditation, in dreams, in stillness, in nature, in the pause between questions. There are insights that arrive like a whisper you didn't know you were listening for. Ideas you couldn't have thought of, feelings you couldn't have manufactured, truths you didn't study but somehow instantly remember. They come from somewhere beyond, and yet they arrive through the most intimate inner doorway. That paradox is part of their magic. You feel them as yours, but they were never yours alone. They are part of a greater intelligence, one you are momentarily in sync with. These moments are not always dramatic. In fact, the deeper the download, the quieter it often is. It doesn't crash in, it seeps in. It emerges softly like mist, like light under the door of a dark room. And if you're not attuned to your own internal spaciousness, you might miss it. You might override it with the speed of your day, the urgency of your tasks, the noise of your mind. But if you are still, if you are receptive, if you are willing to enter the not knowing, you become a vessel through which clarity flows. There is also a responsibility that comes with receiving insight. Not a duty to share, but a duty to live by it. The true integration of a download is not in how eloquently you can describe it, it's in how deeply it rewires your orientation to life. It may ask you to release something, to forgive someone, to step away from the familiar, to expand into a higher level of being. And it may not make sense to anyone else. It may not even make sense to you at first. But your body knows. Your heart knows. That is why it came to you and not someone else. Some downloads unfold over time. They come in fragments. One insight here, another 6 months later, a final piece through a conversation you didn't expect. It's not always immediate. It's not always convenient. You don't get to schedule the arrival of sacred knowledge. You simply learn how to become the kind of being who is open enough to receive it and quiet enough to hold it without breaking its shape by speaking too soon. Would you like me to carry this tone into the next topic too? Here is a lengthy, deep dive expansion of your shadow thoughts, carried through with the same ethereal, introspective, energetically sensitive voice. It explores the inner terrain slowly, richly, and without any closing line, as you asked. Your shadow thoughts expanded. There are thoughts you do not post about, thoughts you do not confess in passing conversation or weave into affirmations. They live just beneath the skin of your consciousness, moving like ripples under still water, quiet, persistent, undeniable. These are your shadow thoughts. They don't seek the light. They don't play by the rules of spiritual correctness. They don't wear masks of positivity. They exist in the terrain of your unconscious, woven into the fabric of your wounds, your shame, your unmet needs. And yet they are not your enemy. These thoughts are not here to sabotage you. They are not evidence of failure or proof of some moral flaw. They are signals, messengers of the unintegrated. They are not designed to be silenced, suppressed, or overcome. They are asking to be seen, to be witnessed in the rawness of their discomfort. Because until they are seen, they rule from the dark, and anything left unacknowledged gains power in secrecy. Your shadow thoughts often echo with the voice of the past. Sometimes they mimic the tone of a parent, a teacher, culture that told you who you had to be in order to be safe, accepted, or worthy. They carry the residue of every moment you were taught that love must be earned, that vulnerability is dangerous, that too much joy will be punished, that desire must be hidden, that softness is weakness, that your truth must be measured, adjusted, or diluted. These thoughts are rarely logical. They contradict your conscious beliefs. They arrive like static interference when you're trying to think clearly or move forward. They whisper, "You're not enough," or "This is too good, it won't last." or no one really sees you. Or sometimes they say nothing at all, just an internal pull into withdrawal, into numbness, into disconnection. But here's the paradox. When you deny the shadow, you divide the self. You fracture your inner world. You begin to perform only one version of you. The version that's approved, polished, spiritual, optimistic, while the deeper, wounded, unfiltered parts of you scream silently for reconciliation. Shadow work is not about eliminating these thoughts. It's about integrating the parts of you that created them. It's about turning inward, not with judgment, but with profound curiosity. Instead of saying, "Why am I thinking this? I need to stop," you begin to ask, "What is this thought trying to protect me from? What part of me believes this is still necessary to survive? Whose voice is this really?" And when you start listening with that level of awareness, you begin to realize your shadow thoughts are ancient. They are not random. They are patterned responses trained into your nervous system through repetition, emotion, trauma, and experience. They were built to keep you safe in environments where safety was never a guarantee. So now, when things start to go too well, when love becomes too deep, when you begin to expand in ways that feel unfamiliar, your shadow thoughts activate, not to sabotage, but to warn. But the warning is outdated. The part of you that needed to brace for disappointment, that needed to shrink to stay invisible, that needed to please in order to survive, that part no longer needs to run the show. But it won't know that until you tell it so. Until you sit with it without shame. Until you witness the discomfort and stay present instead of bypassing. Until you say, "I see you. I know you were trying to protect me, but I'm not that child anymore. I don't live in that story anymore. I don't need to rehearse that pain to stay alive." This is not about overriding your thoughts with new affirmations. It's about metabolizing the old energy beneath them. It's about feeling what those thoughts are trying to avoid. Often the shadow isn't the thought itself. It's the emotion the thought is shielding: grief, rage, abandonment. Emptiness, the fear of being forgotten, unloved, unseen. When you allow yourself to feel what has long been suppressed, the thought no longer needs to shout. The system no longer needs to create internal alarms because the emotion has been processed. The truth has been witnessed. The shadow has been integrated. And in that integration, there is an unlocking. Your creative energy begins to return. Your intuition sharpens. Your sense of self becomes more grounded, more whole, more real, because you are no longer split between performance and presence. You are no longer negotiating between the self you show and the self you hide. You are not avoiding your darkness. You are moving through it, mining it for wisdom, for clarity, for deeper embodiment, because your shadow thoughts aren't the problem. They are the portals to your unmet self. To the versions of you frozen in time, waiting for someone, anyone to say you are allowed to exist even like this. Not just when you're enlightened, not just when you're kind, peaceful, regulated, but when you're reactive, exhausted, insecure, jealous, terrified, angry. You are allowed to exist even when your mind isn't tidy, even when your thoughts are messy, even when the old programs play again and again like scratched record. Want me to carry this into a section on emotional alchemy or how to ritualize the processing of shadow. There comes a moment, quiet at first, nearly imperceptible, when you begin to sense that the life you've been living, the identity you've been sustaining, the narrative you've been rehearsing, has reached its edge. Not because it was wrong, not because it failed, but because it is now complete. And in that soft, nearly inaudible knowing, something begins to stir. A restlessness, a spaciousness, an invitation. That invitation is your next evolutionary step. It doesn't arrive with clear directions. It doesn't declare itself with fireworks or grand epiphanies. Often it begins with dissonance, with the subtle discomfort of once fulfilling routines now feeling hollow, with the realization that what once kept you safe is now keeping you small. The habits that once anchored you now begin to restrict. The further you move into this step, the more you'll notice the energetic contrast between what contracts you and what expands you. You'll begin to feel when your body closes, when your heart shuts down, when your intuition dims, and you'll begin to choose differently. Not out of fear, but from inner authority. That is the mark of evolution. Choice from alignment, not from obligation. Action from inspiration, not from fear. Creation from coherence, not compensation. Your next step will likely not make sense to anyone else. It is not supposed to. It is tailored to your blueprint. It is encoded in your nervous system. It is your unique path of becoming, and it is sacred. Not because of the outcome, but because of the truth it will extract from you. It will ask you to embody what you've known intellectually, to live what you felt in vision, to integrate what you've glimpsed in moments of insight and silence and surrender. And you won't do it perfectly. Evolution is messy, it is non-linear, it is cyclical. But every moment you choose truth over comfort, alignment over approval, expansion over contraction, you are stepping further into that next version of yourself. Not because you are broken, but because you are becoming more of who you already are. Would you like to continue with the next section? I can keep building in this exact tone. There are things you sense about people that they haven't spoken aloud. Fragments of their truth that surface in the silence between words. Echoes of their story that slip through their tone, their body language, their inconsistencies. And it's not always what they do, it's the frequency behind what they do. The subtle vibrations that ripple beneath the surface of the persona. You can feel it. Before logic, before analysis, before reason, you just know. This knowing doesn't come from projection. It doesn't come from projection. It comes from your capacity to read energy, to attune to the invisible language that lives beneath the visible world. It comes from your own journey, your own healing, your own wounds, your own moments of awakening, because in knowing yourself deeply, you become more sensitive to what is real and what is masked in others. You begin to feel what's congruent and what's being concealed. You begin to sense where someone's words are not aligned with their vibration, where the performance is polished, but the energy behind it is fragmented. This kind of knowing can't be faked. It can't be forced. It arrives when the heart is open, when your nervous system is regulated enough to hold nuance without needing immediate certainty. It's not about reading minds. It's about reading patterns, somatic cues, emotional frequencies. And it doesn't need confirmation to be valid. You don't need someone to confess what you already feel, because the knowing isn't dependent on proof, it's dependent on presence, on being so tuned in that you can feel the yes and the no, the expansion and contraction, the transparency and distortion in every subtle exchange. Sometimes what you know about others doesn't match how they present themselves, and that's not necessarily deception. It's often self-protection. People reveal what they feel safe revealing. They embody what they believe they must in order to survive, to be accepted, to maintain the illusion of control. So what you perceive beneath the surface may be the version of them that even they haven't fully met yet. Their deeper truth, their unspoken pain, their suppressed longing, their hidden shame, their unrealized potential, their soul trembling behind the armor of personality. And this is where the discernment becomes sacred. Because just because you know doesn't mean you speak, as you see doesn't mean you expose. Wisdom is not about flaunting perception. It's about holding what you perceive with reverence. It's about knowing what to say, and more importantly, what not to say. Sometimes your knowing is meant to guide how you hold space, how you set boundaries, how you offer compassion, not how you control or correct. Because people don't transform when they're forced to confront what they're not ready to face. They transform when they feel safe enough to soften into their own truth. And so much of this knowing is unspoken. You might never voice it. You might never have a conversation about it. But it informs how you move around them, how you interpret their silences, how you hold space for their inconsistencies. You begin to notice what they're afraid to name, the places they deflect, the patterns they repeat, the lies they believe about themselves, the ways they armor their vulnerability. The strategies they use to avoid feeling. The parts of them that are still frozen in time, looping old wounds in present dynamics. And it's not about being above them. It's not about seeing more clearly because you are somehow more evolved. It's about understanding that we all wear masks at different points in our journey. We all project. We all protect. We all pretend. And sometimes just being seen beneath the mask gently and without agenda becomes the catalyst for someone to drop it on their own. Sometimes your knowing becomes a mirror, a soft reflection that says, I see more of you than you've shown, and it's safe. This knowing also becomes your boundary. Because when you feel the misalignment between someone's words and their energy, when you sense manipulation hidden beneath kindness, or avoidance dressed up as peace, or superiority cloaked in spiritual language, you don't need to argue. You don't need to call it out. You simply remove yourself from the distortion. You honor what you know without needing to be validated. You protect your peace without demanding they understand why. You trust your body's response because your body picks up frequencies long before your mind translates them into thoughts. And yet the knowing doesn't mean you carry their pain. It doesn't mean you take responsibility for their growth. It doesn't mean you hold their unhealed parts at the expense of your own well-being. Your role is not to be their healer unless they consciously choose healing. Your role is not to be their savior. Your role is to remain grounded in your own center while allowing your sensitivity to guide, not consume you, because the more you expand into clarity, the more your field will pick up, and the more sacred your discernment must become. What you know about others is not just about them, it's about you. It shows you where you've done your own inner work. It shows you what parts of yourself you've reclaimed because you recognize those very parts in others. It shows you where your own pain has transmuted into wisdom because now you feel the pain in someone else and meet it with compassion rather than reaction. Your knowing is the result of your inner evolution. The deeper you go within, the clearer you see without. The more fully you meet your own shadow, the more gently you can hold the shadows of others without collapsing into them or needing to fix them. Would you like the next piece in this series continued in this tone? Just say the word, and I'll channel the next one right into form. There is a silence that is not the absence of sound, but the presence of something far more vast. A silence that is not empty, but overflowing. Not quiet, but vibrating with the purest frequency of knowing. A silence that lives beyond the edges of language, untouched by opinion, unshaped by performance. This is the sacred silence. The primordial space where awareness itself originates. It is not created. It is remembered. Not constructed, but uncovered slowly, reverently, as the layers of noise within begin to fall away. This silence is not something you visit. It is something you return to. It is the place beneath the chaos, beneath the mental chatter, beneath the emotional turbulence. It is what holds the waves, not what fights them. And when you descend into it, not with force, not with expectation, but with surrender, you begin to taste what lives beneath the persona, beneath the narratives, beneath the identity. You begin to encounter the spacious self, the infinite observer. The still field that watches all motion, all sensation, all thought without ever becoming lost in any of it. In this silence, there is no agenda, no striving, no proving, no fixing. Nothing needs to be solved. There's only presence. Doesn't push. It doesn't rush. It doesn't demand a result. It listens. It opens. It holds. In the sacred silence, you do not perform your spirituality. You dissolve into it. You do not recite mantras to reach a state. You become the state. You do not pray for answers. You enter the space where all answers are already coded, already known, already living as vibration, waiting to be felt instead of forced. And in this field of silence, the truth speaks, not with words, but with resonance. It begins as a softening. The muscles unclench, the breath deepens, the heartbeat slows. The nervous system begins to untangle its grip on the future, on the past, on the expectations that create distortion. And the mind, used to scrambling for control, starts to release its grip. It no longer needs to label or analyze. It begins to witness. And in that witnessing, there is a reorientation, a remembering of what you are when you are no longer performing what you think you're supposed to be. This silence is not the silence of suppression. It is not the silence of avoidance or disconnection. It is the silence of communion. The silence that holds the entire cosmos within it. The silence that allows space for grief to rise and fall without being rushed, for joy to swell without being contained, for love to expand without being defined. In the sacred silence, all emotional textures are allowed to exist without judgment, without needing to be named. You don't have to make sense. You only have to be. And being in its most raw form is enough. There are sacred codes buried in the silence. Codes that can't be downloaded through intellect. Codes that only unlock when you stop searching, when you release the striving, when you allow your entire system, mental, emotional, somatic, energetic, to drop into stillness so deep that time dissolves, the false self dissolves, and what remains is unfiltered presence. This is the silence that births transformation, not because it teaches you something new, but because it erases everything false. It strips away the noise of should, of shame, of conditioning, of comparison, until only essence remains. And the longer you dwell in it, not grasping, not rushing, but allowing, the more the silence becomes a mirror. A clear, honest, cosmic mirror that shows you the distortions you've held as truth, the patterns you've mistaken for personality, the defense mechanisms you've called identity. And it does not shame you for them. It simply reveals, softly, gently, but unmistakably, because the sacred silence never argues, never persuades. It simply is. And its beingness is the transmission. The body knows this silence. The cells respond to it. The heart recognizes it as home. This is why you feel a deep exhale you didn't know you were holding when you touch it. This is why the tears come unprompted, unexplainable when you enter it. Because it is not just stillness, it is healing, it is reconfiguration. It is sacred calibration to your original frequency, before the world taught you to contort, to dim, to fragment. And once you've touched the silence, truly touched it, it never leaves you, it imprints you. It alters your relationship to noise. You begin to hear the world differently. You notice the fear behind the urgency, the desperation behind the loudness, the exhaustion beneath the constant seeking. You no longer chase answers outside because you know where the real answers live. Not in logic, not in performance, but in stillness, in the pause between thoughts, in the space between breaths. In the vast silence that holds all becoming. This silence is where Source speaks, but not in the way the mind expects. It speaks through knowing, through clarity, through inner alignment that defies explanation. It doesn't offer you a step-by-step plan. It offers you a felt sense, a gravitational pull toward coherence, a remembrance of what is real. From that place, choices begin to arise, not from fear, not from conditioning, but from the pure current of inner resonance. And the more you live from this silence, the less you seek to explain yourself, the less you need to prove anything. The less you rely on external affirmation to validate your path. Because silence teaches you to trust what is unsaid, to honor what is subtle, to live guided by frequencies rather than formulas. It teaches you that true wisdom is often quiet, that real knowing is often wordless. The deepest truths don't need to be shouted. They just need to be felt. Would you like to continue with the next section in this flow? I'm fully tuned in and can channel the next one right away. There is a rare and subtle power in holding what is sacred close to the chest. In a world obsessed with visibility, with validation, with declaring every thought in transformation before it has rooted itself deep within, there is a kind of spiritual rebellion in choosing silence, in choosing stillness, choosing to let something grow in the dark before it is shown to the light. Each of these 8 aspects, your inner healing, your future self's blueprint, your purest acts of kindness, your spiritual downloads, your shadow thoughts, your next evolutionary step, what you know about others. The sacred silence itself, each of them carries a frequency too pure to be diluted by premature exposure. They are not secrets, they are seeds, and seeds are not spoken into life. They are guarded into growth. To keep these things to yourself is not to hoard them, it is to honor them. It is to recognize that not everything is meant to be witnessed before it is whole. Not everything is ready to be mirrored by a world that has not yet made space for your becoming. And not everyone has the eyes to see what only your soul can fully understand. This is the art of sacred containment. Not from fear, not from shame, but from deep energetic awareness. A knowing that what is incubating inside you is too alive, too raw, too holy to be handled casually. Some things must first become embodied before they can be expressed. Some truths must first recalibrate your cells before they find language. Some insights are meant to be integrated in stillness before they're ever offered in sound. So you learn to walk with the unseen, to carry the intangible with reverence, to trust that what is unspoken is still real, still valid, still transforming you in ways no external witness could confirm. And in doing so, you become the container, the living altar, the sacred vessel of your own unfolding, because true power doesn't always announce itself. It emanates quietly, relentlessly, authentically. And those who can feel it will learn to keep to yourself not out of secrecy, but out of spiritual strategy. This is about alignment, not isolation.